Well, hello everyone. This is Al Fadi, and I want to welcome you back to really the this episode that was intended to wrap up this entire series that we called Holes in the Narrative. Think of it as a summary, if you wish, a condensed summary of these. I think we did about 10 episodes, give or take. And we wanted just to, revisit, the list and maybe draw a final conclusion. So with that in mind, I asked Brother Mel to join me again to have the honor of doing so. It was pretty much his material, and I want to make sure that he's the one that can join me in drawing this summary conclusion of this entire series, which pretty much the intent behind it is to show that the standard Islamic narrative has holes in it. What a surprise. And we are trying now to summarize to you evidence of that. And these are not exclusive, obviously, but these are a handful of things that you can use just in your own dialogue with your Muslim friends. Hopefully that will draw their attention to some of the problems, and hopefully that will draw them to begin to search the truth. And that's where we're coming from. It's all about the truth, and that's in the person of our Lord Jesus Christ. Mel, brother, welcome back, and thank you as always for the hard work, and would like for you really to join me here in summarizing this series, the different topics that we've covered, and let's draw a major conclusion at the end.
Yeah, well, great to be back. Great to talk to you again, and hopefully this episode will kind of make sense of the sketchiness of the standard Islamic narrative. Even at the outset, I would say it's not just sketchy. There's clearly things in the standard Islamic narrative which are just plainly false and are not true. One of the things that we looked at the outset was the idea of Muhammad's story being sketchy, and we saw both in terms of his birth and in terms of his death, things didn't quite line up as it should for a story that's meant to be true. We found that there were problems with the idea of Muhammad being born in the year of the elephant. Major problem is Abraham went to the Hijaz about 2 decades before Muhammad's birth. So that's a major problem. And we know that from rock inscriptions, and we know that from Procopius, who was a Roman historian in the 6th century, or Byzantine historian, if you like. So that throws that one out. In terms of Muhammad's supposed death in 632, the early sources we have on Muhammad puts him as being alive in 634. So obviously that's a problem. And it would lead us to question whether we can depend on the veracity of the story of Muhammad if they can't get these two basic details right. And we also saw that Ibn Ishaq and Ibn Hisham, their versions of what happened are so far separated in time, like 130 years in the case of Ibn Ishaq, and I think about 200 years in the case of Ibn Hisham. Why the big gap? Why was there such a large gap in time between Muhammad's supposed biography and the time he lived? So that's sketchy and very unreliable. If the historical person is anything like the narrative that they give later, it's very hard to know. I would suggest that you can't really depend on it. The fact there's a big gap there would suggest that whatever was there before was covered up and deleted, got rid of, and it'd be interesting to get hold of what was got rid of. Unfortunately, it's anyone's guess what was there before. They probably had some form of narrative before, but it probably looked very different. So obviously they had to get rid of it. So that was a big part of the problems with the standard Islamic narrative. Another area that we looked at was the question of images of Muhammad. It was supposed that Muhammad in his time banned images. But what we found was that in terms of the caliph's palaces, and we're talking from the year 700 onwards up to, say, 750,
right,
we saw plenty of evidence that the caliphs were quite happy to have paintings on their walls, have statues and so on, some of them quite lurid. This doesn't seem to match up with the standard Islamic narrative. It seems like this story of Muhammad banning images is a later invention. In fact, if we look at the history of art in Islam, we discover that Muhammad has really been painted all the way through the Islamic histories. So it's hard to justify the idea that he actually banned images in the 7th century. It just doesn't tie well together. Another area of discussion was the Masjid al-Haram. We've been told in the Standard Islamic Narrative that it was originally in Mecca, but we looked at lots of evidence to suggest that it actually could have referred to Jerusalem originally. So the texts that make reference to the Masjid al-Haram, when we line it up with what we know about the Temple Mount, what we know about various descriptions of it, it seems to fit the Temple Mount much better than it does Mecca. In fact, it doesn't fit with Mecca in the Hijaz even remotely. All the activity we discovered around the masjid was happening on the Temple Mount in the 7th century. So we saw that Umar, having conquered Jerusalem, set to work building a masjid right on top of the Temple Mount, and then it was later replaced twice, in fact, the last one being the Dome of the Rock on that same location. So right. I think that kind of leads us to question the Standard Islamic Narrative's tale about the Quran and Muhammad coming from a place called Mecca in the Hijaz. I don't know if you want to jump in at any point.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing because it's like you said, it's either referencing Jerusalem initially, which is very damaging because there we go again, we have something pointing north. And even if someone would say, well, no, it was Mecca, then it was borrowed from Jerusalem. So there is nothing original about it.
Absolutely. And, even the custom of running between Safa and Marwa, well, we discovered that Mount Moriah, which is the Temple Mount, is pronounced Marwa in Arabic. So there's Marwa. And then Mount Scopus, which is also in Jerusalem, is actually alternatively called Safa.
Right.
And so again, it just doesn't add up to say that this originated in the Hijaz. All the other evidence that we've looked at has consistently pointed up north. We know that all of the sources that are used in the Quran are found up in the north. The Aramaic links as well, all up in the north. So it all fits like a glove, in that general neck of the woods up in the north. So the other area that I looked at as well was the idea that, well, what about the Masjid al-Haram existing in Petra? Because obviously Dan Gibson has an alternative theory on that. I've looked at the evidence for that. I looked at the dimensions of a place that was in Petra that was supposed to be that Kaaba. And what I was able to show is that the dimensions don't match Al-Azraqi's description. Now, what's still in play, I did point out, was the Qiblas, and that is something that requires further investigation. But just in terms of the particular place that is suggested as a Kaaba, I don't think it's a contender. I suggested that the archaeologists that worked on the site had suggested that it was actually an altar and not a Kaaba. And it was an altar in service to the nearby temple that was there.
Right.
Another thing that I covered was the origin of Eid al-Fitr.
Right.
And I argued that it had a pagan origin coming from Haran, of all places, again, way up north. And what's interesting is we've got lots of evidence to suggest that there was, back long before Islam, there was a tradition of fasting for 30 days, followed by a feast at the end of the 30 days. And this Babylonian feast was actually called Al-Fitr as well. And we know that Nabonidus promoted this festival and the accompanying 30 days fast in Arabia. And we know that from rock inscriptions. So it's pretty much clear cut. So the question in terms of the standard Islamic narrative is, why does Islam have a pagan fast and feast right smack in the middle of its religion that's supposed to be monotheistic, that believes that worshipping anyone other than God is wrong, and yet we have a clear pagan festival being just basically plonked into Islam without any question of the fact that it doesn't fit with a monotheistic religion. So that's a real oddball in Islam there. And it really kind of shows up a massive hole, I would say, in the standard Islamic narrative. I think hole in the narrative is probably not going far enough. I think that's a Grand Canyon in the standard Islamic narrative there. Another thing that we looked at was the artwork about Muhammad over the centuries. And that tells an interesting tale that Muhammad started out in the first centuries simply a human being, and then gradually became more and more a divine figure. Started off with a small halo. The halo got bigger and bigger until finally his whole entire being in later centuries is projecting light. And then around the time of the Ottomans, his face is veiled. He is so holy that you can't even look at his face. So that in itself should be a serious concern for Muslims. Shirk is not allowed. There's only meant to be one God, and yet we see evidence of a growing idolatry around the figure of Muhammad, which should have been banned, but it just grew and grew over the centuries. No doubt the fact that Islam came in contact with other religions and took on other religions' ideas, for example, Buddhism, had an impact, and you can see that impact over time. And again, this just proves the idea as well that Muhammad didn't ban images, because we can see all down through the centuries, Muslims are drawing images of Muhammad.
Right.
We also looked at the idea of idols of Muhammad. We saw a report by a priest from I'm going to say the 12th century, who reports that the Crusaders found an idol of Muhammad, a golden idol of Muhammad, up on the Temple Mount, possibly in the Dome of the Rock, though it doesn't say exactly where it was. And what was interesting was that there was another report in what's called the Song of Roland, which was written in France around the same time, which reported that Muslims had statues of Muhammad in their possession, and they were praying to the statues and asking for Muhammad's intercession. So that I thought was interesting.
Absolutely.
And actually that fitted in with what we looked at in terms of the question of praying at tombs. And we found that there were Muslim records of Muslims down through the centuries praying to Muhammad in his tomb and asking for his intercession, which again is idolatry, essentially, which fits in with the idea of there being a statue of Muhammad. I think there's not really much of a difference whether you are painting an image of Muhammad, whether you're having a statue of Muhammad, or if you're simply just praying to him in a grave. It's essentially a form of idolatry. I don't know if you want to jump in on that one.
I mean, it's definitely fascinating to me, simply because, like I said, you're praying to a dead man, or asking a dead man, according to chapter 4, verse 64 of the Quran, to intercede on your behalf. I mean, how in the world a dead man is going to intercede on anybody's behalf? He can't even intercede on his own behalf. But yet, the Quran is expecting you to treat him as such. And that's why people were doing what they're doing in obedience to the command given to them in the Quran. It wasn't happening out of nowhere. Of course, later, Salafi movement claimed that was an innovation and misinterpretation. So I guess my question is, does chapter 4, verse 64 still apply today? I mean, that's the main question here that we have to ask.
Yeah, and where we finished up really in the series was the question of, is Islam the fastest growing religion? This is the number one argument that the Taoists like to put forward. It kind of gets them up in the morning. It encourages the flock to know that they're growing rapidly. But what we found when we looked at the data is that in Muslim countries, there is a demographic time bomb at foot. The number of children being born in Muslim families has fallen from 1960 to 2019 by 4 children per woman, and that's a massive drop. And the projection is to continue downwards. So you are going to look at within a decade, the average family size falling below the replacement rate, which means that the population in North Africa and the Middle East is set to go into free fall. And on top of that, to make matters worse, apostasy is taking off. 52% of young people in Iran no longer believe in Islam. 52% is a huge number. So we have massive apostasy. There is clearly a failure in attracting people to Islam as well. And then there's also the immigration problem. There's so many people leaving the Middle East and North Africa. They're taking a plane or a train or a boat to Europe, and many of them are actually converting to Christianity. They are filling the empty churches that the Taoists like to talk about. Well, thank you very much. There are hundreds of thousands of Muslims coming to Europe and converting to Christianity, and actually they are very welcome indeed in the churches. So that's really, what we've covered in those 10 episodes. To summarize, I suppose, to bring it to conclusion, I think the overall picture is we're seeing that the standard Islamic narrative has holes in it. It's sketchy. There's a lot of it which is clearly false. It doesn't hold together. There are an awful lot of redactions going on. There are fraudulent hadiths being inserted into the tradition. There are things which the Wahhabis want to call innovations, which in fact are really long traditions, whereas their ideas are the real innovations. So if you look at the big picture, you find that Muhammad doesn't seem to have a reliable biography. Where he's from is in doubt.
Right.
His biography is in doubt. Where the Quran came from is in doubt, though.
Right.
What we do find about the Quran is that it's been put together from many sources. It's a patchwork. It doesn't have a divine origin, but it seems to have a very human origin.
But also there's a process of standardizing it, so it wasn't really standardized until a later time. And again, we have this theme of later development, progressive basically embellishment, if you wish.
Absolutely. And then there's a question of, which is the Quran that represents the earliest Quran? Most Muslims use the Hafs Quran, but is that the earliest one? So, and there's so many variations between all of the Qurans. That's not something I've covered in this series, but I know Jay and you have covered that in great detail. But there are a host of problems for Muslims in terms of Islam. If you were trying to create a religion and trying to create a set of circumstances where you could rely upon it, you couldn't do a worse job than what Islam has created. It has literally done everything wrong. It's introduced a book at a time when the language itself was in flux, the script was in flux, even the text itself seems to have been taken from another language originally, so that's in flux. The beliefs are in flux and continue to be in flux, and so many variations have been introduced. The religion itself didn't hold together. I actually can't tell you how many different sects there are in Islam. Maybe you know the final number, but there are so many different sects, each one claiming to be the true religion.
That's right. So it's very hard really to tell. Yeah. Well, brother, thank you so much. That was awesome. And I hope everybody enjoyed these episodes. We did basically, as you can see, 10 shows. We did an intro and we did this wrap up as well. Altogether, I think it would have been around 12, give or take. But this is just a flavor of things. I hope, Brother Mel, that we can come back later and add more evidence of the shakiness of this standard Islamic narrative. And of course, all of the discoveries that you, your team, Jay, and others have been addressing and we've been showcasing here in our channel along with yours, in and of itself provides a shaky foundation for that standard Islamic narrative. So what's the conclusion? Really, the conclusion to my Muslim friends who are watching is this. Go and inspect this info. Don't take our words for it if you're doubting us. But once you confirm, and you will confirm that these evidence are true, we ask you to consider coming to Jesus because he's the only solution to this problem. Thank you, brother, as always. If you would like to add anything else before we wrap up.
I would say you can throw out one or two of these. You might say, well, this doesn't seem to make sense to me, but there are so many points here in the series that you cannot throw them all out. I think the one that stands out for me is Eid al-Fitr. That's clearly borrowed from paganism, and there's no way you can mix monotheism and paganism. So I would suggest find another religion. If you're looking for a religion that comes from God, this is not it. It has human handprints all over it, and that's right. My final word on it.
That's right. Thank you so much, brother, as always. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Please consider to subscribe to our brother's channel, Sneakers Corner. Consider partner with him in support, of course, and in prayers. And we ask you to do the same thing, to consider subscribing to our channel, CIRA International, on YouTube. And also, we appreciate your partnership with us financially through Patreon or PayPal. And we are blessed by your support and your faithful giving. Thank you again, brother. Thank you, everyone. This is Al Fadi, over and out. God bless you. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, CIRA International, and click on the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we publish a new video or go live. I would also like to appeal to you to consider becoming a Patreon patron by clicking the link right below. By doing so, you can give towards the production of these videos. There are also other options for you where you can give to our channel. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.